Somewhere on the internet right now, a meme is circulating about a very specific, very common human quirk. People joke about it, laugh about it, and mostly assume it is either a punchline or a personal weirdness with no real explanation. But it turns out this particular quirk has a genuine, well-studied neuroscience answer, one that traces back to a map inside your brain that most people have never heard of, and a wiring accident that happens far more often than you might expect. Think about your own body for a second. Somewhere in your skull, there is a small strip of brain tissue responsible for processing touch and sensation from every single part of you, your fingertips, your lips, your back, your feet. That strip is not laid out randomly. It is laid out like a map, with each body part occupying its own dedicated region, and neighboring regions on your actual body generally sitting near each other on that map too. Except in a handful of very specific places, they do not. This brain map has a name. Neuroscientists call it the somatosensory homunculus, sometimes just called the sensory homunculus, a strip of tissue called the postcentral gyrus that processes incoming touch signals from your entire body, organized point by point to mirror your physical anatomy. Neurosurgeons discovered this map decades ago by directly stimulating exposed brain tissue in patients during surgery and recording which body part the patient reported feeling a sensation in. Here is where the story gets strange. When researchers mapped this strip in detail, they found something unexpected. The region processing sensation from the feet sits directly next to the region processing sensation from the genitals, not near each other in some loose, general sense, but immediately adjacent, sharing a border on the cortical map, the way two countries share a fence line. A neuroscientist named V.S. Ramachandran, well known for his work on phantom limb sensations in amputees, proposed a compelling explanation connecting this anatomical detail to a specific, common pattern in human attraction. Ramachandran's broader research career focused heavily on cases where brain wiring crosses in unexpected ways, most famously in patients who lost a limb and continued to feel sensations in the missing hand or foot because neighboring brain regions had begun bleeding into territory the limb used to occupy. Applying similar logic, Ramachandran proposed that partial cross-wiring or unusually strong connectivity between these two adjacent cortical regions, the foot map and the genital map, could produce exactly the kind of overlap where stimulation or attention directed at one region partially activates the neural territory of the other. In simpler terms, because these two maps sit right beside each other in the brain, some degree of crosstalk between them is almost structurally inevitable in a percentage of people, given how densely packed and closely bordered these regions are. This is a genuinely elegant explanation, because it does not require anything mysterious or pathological to explain a widespread human pattern. It requires only ordinary biological variation in how tightly or loosely two immediately neighboring brain regions are wired to each other, the same kind of variation that exists in virtually every other trait across the human population. But cortical proximity is very likely only one thread in a more complicated picture. Long before Ramachandran's cross-wiring theory, a very different explanation was in circulation, one rooted in classical conditioning rather than brain anatomy. In 1966, a researcher named Stanley Rachman ran an experiment demonstrating that a fetish-like response could be deliberately created in a laboratory setting through simple associative learning, using neutral, ordinary images repeatedly paired with existing arousal responses, until the neutral image alone began triggering a similar reaction on its own. Rachman's experiment echoes a much older and more famous finding: the discovery that arousal and attraction, like nearly every other emotional response humans experience, can be shaped through repeated association, the same basic mechanism behind Pavlov's famous conditioning experiments with dogs and bells. Applied to something like a specific body part, this theory suggests that early formative experiences, an image encountered at a particular developmental stage, a specific context repeatedly present during early experiences of attraction, could establish a lasting associative link that persists well into adulthood, entirely independent of any cortical wiring explanation. Notice that these two explanations, cross-wiring in the sensory cortex and classical conditioning through early associative learning, are not mutually exclusive. A person could plausibly have somewhat closer than average cortical proximity between the relevant brain regions, making them more susceptible to developing this kind of association in the first place, while the actual specific attraction pattern gets locked in later through ordinary conditioning during a particular developmental window. Biology may set the stage. Experience may write the specific script that plays out on it. To understand just how ordinary this kind of wiring accident actually is, it helps to look at a completely different, much more thoroughly studied phenomenon that works on exactly the same underlying principle. Synesthesia is a condition where stimulation of one sense reliably triggers an experience in a completely different sense. People who see specific colors when they hear certain musical notes, or who perceive numbers as having distinct, consistent colors despite always being printed in plain black ink. For decades, researchers have proposed that synesthesia arises from exactly the same kind of mechanism Ramachandran pointed to: unusually dense neural connectivity or incomplete pruning between two brain regions that process fundamentally different types of information, but happen to sit near each other during early development. The comparison matters because synesthesia is now well accepted in neuroscience as a real, measurable, non-pathological variation in how certain brains are wired, not a disorder, not a flaw, simply a documented difference in cortical connectivity that produces a consistent, unusual perceptual experience. If cross-wiring between unrelated brain regions can reliably produce something as vivid as seeing color when hearing sound, then a milder version of the exact same phenomenon occurring between two directly adjacent regions on the body sensation map, the foot and the genitals, becomes considerably less mysterious. It is the same category of brain quirk, simply showing up in a different pair of neighboring regions. Survey research adds another useful piece of context here. Multiple studies surveying self-reported patterns of attraction across large populations have consistently found that specific body part attractions, feet included, appear at meaningfully higher rates than most other reported body part preferences, a pattern that is held up across different countries and different survey methodologies over several decades of research. That kind of consistency, showing up reliably across different populations and different points in time rather than as a random, culturally specific quirk, is exactly the signature you would expect from something rooted in a shared piece of human neuroanatomy rather than something driven purely by cultural trends or media exposure in any one particular place or era. It is worth briefly mentioning where the older, once-dominant explanation for this phenomenon came from, since it shaped public perception of the topic for decades. Sigmund Freud offered psychoanalytic explanations for fetishistic attraction rooted in his broader theories of childhood psychosexual development. Freud's specific framework here, much like several of his other theories, has not held up particularly well under modern empirical scrutiny, and contemporary researchers largely favor neurological and learning-based explanations like Ramachandran's and Rachman's over Freud's original psychoanalytic model. Freud correctly identified that something interesting was happening. His explanatory mechanism, however, was largely superseded once neuroscience gained the tools to actually look inside the brain doing the wiring. There's a broader lesson embedded in this specific case, one that applies to human attraction generally, not just this one particular pattern. Attraction is rarely, if ever, a single, simple switch. It sits at the intersection of inherited brain architecture, the literal physical layout of neurons in your skull, and lived experience, the specific associations and reinforcements your particular life happen to build on top of that architecture. Two people can end up with a broadly similar attraction pattern through genuinely different underlying pathways, one leaning more heavily on inherited cortical proximity, another leaning more heavily on early conditioning, with most people likely landing somewhere on a spectrum shaped by both forces simultaneously. This also explains why the pattern shows up so unevenly across the population rather than universally. If cortical proximity between the foot and genital maps varies naturally from person to person, the way essentially every other measurable brain structure varies from person to person, then only a subset of people would have wiring dense enough to produce a noticeable crosstalk effect on its own. Layer early conditioning on top of that natural variation, and you get a pattern that shows up reliably across large populations, is well documented enough to become an internet meme, and yet remains far from universal, exactly what you would expect from a trait shaped by both a biological predisposition and a developmental trigger, rather than either factor alone. None of this makes the underlying pattern strange or something requiring explanation as a flaw. It simply means the brain's map of the body has a genuine physical quirk built into its layout, a border shared between two regions that have nothing to do with each other functionally, sitting immediately next to each other purely as an accident of how the cortex happened to fold and organize itself during early neural development. Combine that structural accident with the ordinary human capacity for associative learning, and you get a well-documented, scientifically grounded explanation for a pattern that most people only ever encounter as a punchline. It is also worth noting how modern clinical psychology treats patterns like this today, compared to how it treated them a century ago. Contemporary diagnostic frameworks generally distinguish between a specific attraction pattern existing at all, which on its own is considered simply a variation in human sexuality, with no clinical significance whatsoever, and that pattern becoming distressing, compulsive, or interfering with someone's ability to function or connect with others, which is the actual threshold clinicians use before any diagnostic language enters the picture. The mere presence of a specific, consistent attraction pattern on its own sits comfortably within the range of ordinary human variation, no different in principle from variation in any other trait shaped jointly by inherited neural architecture and individual life experience. So the next time that meme crosses your feed, or the next time this exact topic comes up in conversation and someone treats it as an unexplainable joke, you will know there is nothing mysterious happening at all. There's a map inside every human skull, two regions sitting side by side on that map purely by anatomical coincidence, and a nervous system perfectly capable of blurring the line between neighbors. What looked like a punchline is actually a small, elegant window into how oddly, and how understandably, your own brain is wired together.